Over the past 5 years, I've been privileged to be involved in work that strengthens the leadership capacity of women and girls. As a result of this work, I'm convinced that African women and girls are compassionate agents of change who could help accelerate Africa's growth story. I've had the pleasure of working in different countries such as Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, and South Sudan. And in the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you a few observations. I want to also share a few pieces of advice that I believe men and women can do individually and collectively to help empower Africa's women. But I'd like to start with a story that will perhaps give you an understanding of why I do what I do. When I was barely 5 years old, my family left Ghana as political refugees, and we were relocated to the US, which is where we lived until I was a teenager. The culture was new and strange to us, so adjusting to life in America wasn't easy. The culture was new, but our parents helped us focus on a twofold agenda. One, to learn English, and two, to make sure we succeeded at school. Their efforts really paid off because in the long term, we became very fluent in English, and we did end up succeeding in school. But to most people, we were just those strange Africans whose names were hard to pronounce. Some people were downright mean to us, calling us strange names such as African slaves. That wasn't cool. And in addition to being ridiculed for where I come from, I was also ridiculed because, according to the classmates in school, they believed I had a really deep voice. Anytime I would raise my hand to answer a question, somebody would invariably laugh and ask, was that a man or a boy who had just spoken? The teasing was actually quite brutal. And as a result, I stopped raising my hand. Even if I knew the answer to a question in class, I refused to raise my hand because I was afraid of the ridicule. Eventually, I took this behavior home and I stopped talking altogether. It didn't take long for my parents to notice the change in my behavior. And one day my father confronted me to ask why I had become so quiet. After a little prodding, I confessed to him that I had stopped talking because people were ridiculing the sound of my voice. In consoling me, he said something that has stuck with me ever since. He said, "Don't let people steal your voice. Your voice is your power." I really think that experience started my love affair with the idea of finding my voice and helping other women find the same. As I reflect on that experience, it helps me understand why I dream of a world where the voices of women and girls are heard at every leadership table. If you'll permit me, I'd also like to draw some insights and lessons that I believe can strengthen our activism towards promoting women and girls as leaders in the public sphere. My major source of inspiration for this is a story that is drawn out of the Christian Bible. I do recognize that not everyone in this room may accept the Bible as truth. However, the statistics do show that over 50% of Africans practice Christianity. So I do believe that this text will find some widespread relevance and applicability. But if not, please indulge me and accept this as perhaps a case study of sorts. So there's this story that I came across in the Bible, in Numbers 27. It's chapter 1 and verses up to 11. And it tells a story of 5 sisters known as the Daughters of Zelophehad, whose father had passed away at a time when women could not inherit property at all. Instead of sitting back and being gloomy because of the laws, they decided to get together and confront the leadership of the land. As the story goes, they stood before the leader of the time, Moses and Eleazar the priest, and before the elders and the whole congregation of Israel. And they asked a simple question: why should our father's name die out just because he had no sons? So give us an inheritance among our relatives, is what they demanded. And the story goes that Moses, the leader at the time, brought their request to God. And God spoke to Moses and said, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right. They deserve an inheritance, so give them what they're asking for. This story of the Daughters of Zelophehad is really the only biblical example that I've come across that really talks about women coming together in a spirit of inspired activism. I really believe that if more and more African women were to follow this example, we'd see a lot of change much more quickly than perhaps we have so far. The text says that they stood before Moses and Eleazar the priest and before all the leaders and the whole congregation of Israel. That is the modern day equivalent of standing before a president, his vice president, and every supreme leader and every person in a nation. Although they lived in a time where women were not highly regarded, these daughters of Zelophehad, they didn't allow timidity to hold them back. Imagine the positive changes women of Africa could bring in the spirit of inspired activism. Imagine the negative traditions and cultural practices that we could undo. Imagine the impact that we could have on the nations of our world. For those of us who've always believed that activism on behalf of women is unchristian, I really hope that this story proves to you that God doesn't merely condone women's activism, he backs it as well. But what other lessons do we draw from this story of the Daughters of Zelophehad? I believe that the mountains of injustice that surmount women in Africa can only be removed through the spirit of united sisterhood. So I do think it's time for women to move across generational, religious, and professional and other boundaries to start having more collaborative relationships with other women. For women leaders in the room, I encourage you to be that example that women can and women do and women should help each other. And that's the result, and that will result in more and more change, more and more quickly. But as much as the unity of women can inspire change, this change doesn't happen in a vacuum. We learn from the examples of the Daughters of Zelophehad that their change depends on cooperation with and among men as well. So from this, I think we can deduce another important principle, that we cannot really effectively promote the cause of women without the active partnership and involvement of men. I'm convinced that the Daughters of Zelophehad gained the support of their leaders because they advocated their cause in a way that enabled men to see themselves as partners and not as enemies. This is a very important posture, especially because women's empowerment is often painted as a solely feminine process, where we often presume that we want women to succeed at the detriment of men. However, I don't believe that men are our enemies, and it would be dangerous for us to allow our activism to demonize them as such. I also believe that men are just as constrained by gender stereotypes as women, and our true enemies are ignorance and fear. So it's incumbent upon all of us who work for the promotion of women and girls to not allow our differences to cause us to lose sight of the fact that men need to be roped in as partners in promoting the cause of women and girls. I believe also that healing the strains in the relationship between our genders needs to be a priority in our activism, or otherwise our efforts may self-destruct. I've observed through my years of work with women that a lot of women find it difficult to respect men. Maybe it's because they've been let down by men in the past, because hate is usually a good mask for our extreme pain. Feelings of hate towards irresponsible fathers, abusive boyfriends, manipulative bosses, or maybe they've been raped or abused in a way that positions them to think in a derogatory way towards men. But I do believe that there is a connection between our freedom from that hate and the progress that women and girls on our continent deserve. Women, I do believe that the cause of women and girls, we do the cause of women and girls a favor if we forgive the men in our lives that may have failed us. Because unless we're willing to let go of that bitterness and that enmity that many of us have formed against men, we lose the opportunity to work with men as partners. I also believe that we need to be vocal and very introspective about the things that we as women can do better to make sure that the cause of women and girls is assured. For instance, many of us make the mistake of exploiting our sexuality as a tool of manipulation. I'm specifically talking here about women who use sex as a tool of exchange to get promotion or favor. In East Africa, they have a term called sexually transmitted leadership. And that refers to women who actively look to exchange sex for opportunity. So they go to businesses and women are promoted into leadership, not because they're competent and deserving, but because they've exchanged a favor with the right person. I believe that these types of behaviors also limit our ability to be effective because it undermines the work of young women and young girls who are working hard to succeed in legitimate ways. I also believe that men have a role, and they can help empower women as well by committing to sexual integrity. We live in a culture that glorifies male sexuality, excusing sexual infidelity in men, and often turning a blind eye to the hearts that lay broken in the wake of that. In some places, it's recorded that men do use sex as a weapon of subjugation, and across war zones, sex is actually used as a weapon of war. You will find that the lack of sexual integrity has warped HIV/AIDS into a women's illness. So yes, there needs to be changes here, and I'm not sure enough people are willing to talk about it. I truly believe that the next chapter for the gender equality and women's movement in Africa lies in us refining and refocusing our advocacy. Challenging the status quo is necessary for any meaningful change to occur, and advancing the cause of women is not different. The women's movement, like any movement, has different actors, and each of these different actors have different ways of operation. If I could use the civil rights movement as an example, there were leaders in that movement who advocated for nonviolent resistance, and yet there were others who said change needed to come by any means necessary. As I reflect on the women's movement in Africa, and also realize that many women do not feel comfortable identifying themselves as feminist, I'm concerned that it's probably because some of our strategies have done us more harm than good. For example, I've never felt completely comfortable with the slogan, anything a man can do, a woman can do, and even better. A woman can become anything that she determines herself to be. And I'm sure this statement has been well-intentioned and does try to mean that. However, I find that we need to be careful that we don't reinforce the notion that women are in competition with men. I don't believe that that's what true empowerment is about. To truly empower women, I think our cause would be better served if instead of using the status of men as a benchmark of what we should and can achieve, we should help women and girls focus their energy on just simply becoming better than what they were yesterday. Men, I really can't leave this podium without reaching out to you to encourage you to help your sisters out. In my opinion, men have a major role to play in supporting the empowerment of women. But unfortunately, our world is filled with women who are suffering dire effects at the cause of men. Sadly, some men also feel threatened by advances that women make. So I want to offer 2 pieces of advice. To those of you who are fathers, I want to encourage you to be a committed and loving father. Interestingly enough, statistics will show you when you profile the lives of women leaders that most of the most influential women leaders in the world grew up with strong fathers who affirmed them and helped them form a positive image of themselves. I also want to encourage you to be a source of encouragement for other women in your life. Be a source of encouragement to your female friends and colleagues. Help and support their growth, because when you encourage and support women, the truth is they will support you too. Ask any pastor or politician, and they'll tell you how invaluable the support of women is to their success. Even the biblical Jesus had a company of women who supported his ministry and supported his cause. And I'm sure he gained that support because he first sowed the seeds of encouragement in their lives. Men and women of Africa need each other, perhaps now more than ever. Our continent can only be transformed when we have women working together and in partnership with men. And I hope that that happens within my lifetime. I do realize that not every woman, regardless of her origin or social class, will become a visible leader on the front line. But I do believe that the more that do emerge, they can leverage their leadership for the good of others. So women, be proof that women can, do, and always will support each other. I believe it's our responsibility to ensure that we do our part to dispel the notion that women are our own enemies. And above all, we need to be a model that others can emulate. I hope my reflections, my criticisms, and my insights encourages each of us to boldly and openly stand up for the cause of women and girls. Because the truth is, Africa needs us all, man and woman, boy and girl, hand in hand. Thank you.